Peter, can you just watch, like, for people coming into the waiting room? I can't, it says that, I think that the waiting room has been disabled, but then people keep popping up in the waiting room.
No, it says
Okay, I'll disable the waiting room.
that you'd go security and
Oh.
then click the thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
never
There
mind.
you
We
go.
got it.
I got it turned off now.
Okay.
All right. All right, everybody, welcome to, this is our fourth session of this school year. Is it fourth or fifth? Yeah, it's our nth session, this session this year. Talking about assessment, ongoing conversations, or like I like to call it, assessment matters in math education. And you can take that as a double entendre if you wish. And today our guest is going to be Susan Robinson, who is going to continue this conversation with us. And Zoe, I'm going to let you, Susan, I'm going to let you introduce Zoe, but I'm going to turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing from the two of you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And maybe, Peter, if you can just keep your eye on the chat, and if people have questions as we're going, we'll just sort of see how it goes. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that we are talking to all of you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Halkamenan and Sinchaflin speaking people. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Susan Robinson. I am a high school teacher of math at Gulf Island Secondary School. So we are currently on Salt Spring Island. I am also this year and next year the president of the BCAMT. And so we're pretty excited that you guys have stuck with us for all of these sessions, starting after Peter's session like a year and a half ago at our fall conference. I want to introduce everyone to Zoe Clark. Zoe is a grade 12 student here at Gulf Island Secondary School. Zoe has been in my classroom since September. So it turns out she has spent every single day of her grade 12 year in my classroom. She was in pre-calculus 12 in first semester and is in calculus right now with me. And so, I don't know, Zoe, you want to say hi?
I'm happy to. Hello, everybody. Thank you for hosting me and having me here today. It's a really special opportunity to be here with Ms. Robinson and all of you guys today. And I hope that anything that I can say is hopefully a little bit helpful, because I've heard a little bit about what you guys have done and what you're aiming towards, but I don't know, we'll see.
Okay, so I'm going to try sharing my screen. See how this goes.
Oh, I didn't know it was that easy.
But now I have to figure out how to play. Okay, I think it's worked.
It's working perfect.
Excellent. So Zoe and I are here to talk, well, I'm here to talk about my assessment journey, where I started and how I got to where I am right now with my assessment. And I've invited Zoe here to share her perspective as a student in my class. And so Zoe and I have gone over the presentation, and she's got a couple places where she's going to pop in and take over. But I've also given her the opportunity to kind of just jump in and talk wherever she feels the urge to make her views known. And so really, the journey started many years ago. I've been working on changing my assessment practices for, I'm not sure how long, but really started thinking about assessment for learning, of learning, and as learning, and really started this whole process doing a lot of reading about formative versus summative assessment. And then did some more reading, and for a while I kind of thought like that I was on an outcomes, what happened? I went backwards, sorry. I was on a outcomes-based assessment journey, but it turns out that I wasn't really. And so there was a little bit of period of time when I thought maybe I was doing outcomes assessment grading, but I wasn't.
Hi there. Can I order 2 large pizzas for takeout? Can I get 1 cheese?
Maybe we need to
and
mute
1 half ham and pineapple.
2 won't be enough for us.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
How far afield can we deliver the pizza?
Pepperoni mushroom for me.
where exactly are we delivering this? And I hope you're not ordering from us, because I don't know about you, but I'm not in Quebec.
So after I did a kind of failed outcomes-based grading approach, I went into a no grading approach. And then I have landed here back at an outcomes based grading approach. And so I wanted, I guess, kind of come back to where I was at the beginning. And I got really tired of using like the predictable nature of certain grades and certain containers that I was using to calculate my final class grades for my students. And so in particular, I used to have a section for assignments, and I'd give my students assignments and I'd mark the assignments and collect all of these grades and then average it out. And really, I knew from the beginning which kids were going to get good marks in that section of my course, because they kind of set themselves up as either students who wanted to do the work that I was giving them or students who didn't want to do the work. And so this like the high achievers were getting, you know, that 10% of their grade was a kind of certain right from the beginning. Whereas lots of the other kids, as soon as they had missed a couple of assignments, were like, well, whatever, like I can't raise this grade up anymore, so I'm not going to bother. And so I really felt like I was rewarding the students who did their work and punishing the students who didn't, but neither of those things had anything to do with learning. And so as I was changing my practices, doing lots of reading. And one of the things that really struck me was that if students get something back, an assessment back with, you can either put a grade on it and that's it. So that's pretty easy. Do lots of ticks, a couple of X's, count up all the ticks and give them a grade out of 30. If you give them a grade and put descriptive feedback on their paper, they're only going to pay attention to the grade. And so the descriptive feedback is really only valuable to students when it's not attached to a grade. And so the first thing I did was really just eliminate grades on my assignments. And I was just using assignments as a way to figure out where the students were, what we needed to do still, and trying to give the kids feedback to further them along. My colleagues, a lot of my colleagues were like, well, if you don't grade it, they're not going to do it. Like you have to grade it in order to get it back. And that was not the case at all. I found that I had better compliance with the assignment work as soon as the marks got taken off and students were like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And I still, for many years, in fact, I would still say even today, I get students who say, well, can I fix this assignment or can I add to it and get a better grade? And I say, of course you can. You can do whatever you want and I will look at your assignment again. And they really thought for a long time that, yeah, they were going to get a better number on their assignment. And they just kept doing this work.
And I mean, personally, I still think that's huge because if you like, for one example that I'll just speak on a little bit is that we did in Calculus 12, we did, pardon me, a test on Monday and there were 2 pages and I only finished one of them. The second page had an extending question, which of course I'm sure we'll explain in a little bit, but I didn't have enough time to finish and it was the end of the day. So there was no more time. And normally if that was any other class, I would have gone home feeling extremely frustrated because I did 50% of what was asked on the page. And I demonstrated the fact of my proficiency, but I didn't show any further that I could go. And I would think, okay, well, that's really frustrating. That's going to go towards my grade. It's going to be worse. And then just, it would snowball. But I didn't. I went home knowing that I could do quiz corrections. I could come with another extending question. I could come with another question that would show my knowledge and it just wouldn't be in the specific time frame. But that didn't mean that what I did was over in that block.
So in this journey, after I stopped really giving grades for assignments, I then stopped giving grades for tests. And I just gave, and at first it was a 4-point scale, and then I moved to a 3-point scale. And my 3-point scale was really like, nope, you didn't get it. Yep, you got it. Or, hey, you have more work to do. And that kind of worked for a while, but it started to kind of feel a little bit loose. Like I didn't have any like hard, fast records in the same way that I used to have. And so I was still I was focused on this feedback, but I didn't know how to share the feedback with the students in a way that would help them figure out where they were with the course at any given time. So that's been part of my journey as we've gone through this changing assessment practices. Another thing in terms of changing assessment practices was really about final exams. And so I know that I've been asking this question for a long time, like at least since 2014. Really, what is the purpose of a final exam? And I know that this dates back to 2014. I think I'm right with this date because that was when we went on strike in June. And so in the middle of June, we were out on the picket lines and all of a sudden our students weren't writing final exams. And I was teaching a calculus class and I was really curious, like, would that class of students be affected by them not being able to write a final exam at the end of the course? What was going to happen with like the grade 10 students or the grade 11 students who didn't write exam? Were we going to see any difference in what they knew next year? And the answer was, of course not. It didn't make any difference whatsoever. And so we had students who didn't write exams, still passed courses, still went on to do more math. And as far as I know, none of them were really harmed because they didn't write a final exam. And so I've spent a lot of time asking people, what is the purpose of writing exams? And I've had lots of responses. So we need to prepare students for post-secondary education. They're going to write exams in university, so we better give them exams in high school. We need to make sure that students are prepared for entry exams. For example, if applying for particular jobs or training, they better know how to write an exam if they need to write an exam to get onto the RCMP, for example. Also, because sometimes stress is good. In fact, I think we heard this afternoon from somebody, that we need to put students into stressful situations so they can learn to think on their feet, because it's the most efficient way to know what students know, that they all do the same thing at the same time, and it really doesn't take a long time to mark a final exam. And finally, the last one came from a university professor at UBC, because we can't give students an honesty pill. And none of these answers were enough for me to say that we need to really make sure that our students are writing final exams all the time. Because what I know is that what exams are not, is they are not a celebration of learning. And this really struck home one year when I was walking behind a couple of students who had just finished a Math 10 exam, and they had their heads down, their feet were dragging, and they're like, oh my God, I feel so stupid. And I thought, wow, like those kids, they hate math right now. And it's going to be so hard to pull them back in grade 11 to a point where they actually enjoy the course. And so that was kind of like an epiphany moment for me, that we're really like sucking the life out of our classes through these final exams.
And I actually half an hour ago had the exact same moment in my chemistry class, because we were talking about grades and we were talking about, we just switched over teachers and we were talking about our final exam and how it's going to be worth 30% of our final mark. And if something's happening and you you do poorly on that final exam, even if you know really, if you excel in the rest of the course, you do really poorly on that exam, it will reflect in your mark as your entire understanding of the course. And it puts so much pressure on the understanding of who you are and your understanding of the entire curriculum, just because you have one test on one day.
So a couple of, I guess a year and a half ago, I've switched in my final exams, and sometimes I still give a final exam. Sometimes my final exams are pieced together with a group exam where students are working together, standing up at whiteboards and doing their exam in the same way that we've worked through a class. But I've also moved to using final projects as a possibility for students to show that they're learning. A couple of years we've done projects about calculus for 10-year-olds. I've had classes of students write their own exams and then take their exams. I've given students choice. We last semester in Pre-Cal 12, we had groups of students doing 3 different things for their final assessment. With my grade 9 class, they were feeling a little bit stressed out. And so instead of a final exam, we did a final assignment where they could talk to one another. And that was actually really successful. But a year and a half ago, my pre-Cal 12 class asked if they could create an exam for me. And they created an 8-question exam. And so I was thinking, yeah, sure, I'll write their exam. It'll take me about an hour, and then I'll have like another hour or so to sort of observe what they're doing as they're writing their exam. And I was floored by this exam. It took me half an hour to answer the first question. And there's been times when I've thought that students with test anxiety, it's really about like maybe they have test anxiety because they don't know the subject, but I know pre-calculus 12. I can't count how many times I've taught that course. I've been teaching it for 15 years now. And I feel that I know it inside and out. And yet here I was struggling to answer this one question that these kids had written for me. And I got my pencil kept getting really dull, and I needed to go and sharpen my pencil, but then I was disturbing the students. So that was stressing me out. I didn't know if I was going to finish the whole thing. And all of a sudden I realized that test anxiety and stress is a real thing that has nothing to do with learning at all. And so these are some of the questions that I've been asking myself in my assessment practice over the years. Next, we're going to come back to, well, okay, so why was it that I really moved away from wanting to rely on grades, and what is the problem with grades? And I think I'm going to turn this over to Zoe to start.
Okay, so I wanted to start off this way, and I was thinking about how I wanted to start this section, and simply not to pat myself on the back in any way, but just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. So since grade 9, I have finished every class that I've done with an A, principals list every year, 90% above. So there's a system. There's a system to grading. There's a system to how the whole thing works. And I would like to say that for myself, I've learned how to finesse the system. I've learned what to do, how to go within the guidelines to get my desired outcome. There's sort of there's like steps you have to go through. And I sort of spelled them out as completion, explanation, compliance, memorization, and regurgitation. And none of that really taught me how to learn. It taught me how to do well in the course, but not how to excel or to develop most in my own sort of specific way. And because so much of my work and my attention and my time outside of school is dedicated to my grades and dedicated to schoolwork, I associate a large portion of that with my self-worth and who I am as a person, which sounds a little bit ridiculous to say out loud, but as I was talking to my other students, my peers in my other classes, I heard that they have similar situations. If they're a very high achiever, you dedicate so much of your time to this, you assume that you're putting in this much effort, how much is it worth? If this is your best, how good is your best? So then one of the huge things that can be so detrimental, and I can speak for myself personally, is if you get a bad mark on a test or a bad mark in a class, you immediately associate that with you are worthless as a person, or you are less capable or less smart or less intelligent, or you don't know it as well. And that can do a lot is depending on how bad it is or how you feel, it can do a lot to somebody's motivation or idea of what the whole grading process is like.
And I've done a lot of research, and all of the research really supports exactly what Zoe says. And one of the things, like this idea of grades is, it really focuses on compliance. Like students will do what they need to do in order to get the grade they want. And one thing Zoe didn't talk about is that this often leads to cheating. And if students can see a way to cheat without getting caught, if it's going to guarantee them a better mark, they're going to do it. And what it doesn't do is grades do not help with risk-taking or creativity. And this is like, these are two of the curricular competencies in math 10 to 12. Like one of the curricular competencies we are supposed to be working with our students is to take risks when offering ideas in classroom discourse. But if students have gone through a system where they are maybe punished for taking risks, they're learning not to take risks. And so teaching them to take risks in a system that is not helping them figure this out is like, we've got this tension here between how we're grading and then what we're wanting students to do. Another interesting thing that I read was actually went back to in the articles where I was reading where students who get an assignment back with a number grade and a letter grade and feedback, or just feedback, and where the research was saying that the kids will only really pay attention to the feedback. I went back to one of the articles that those articles were quoting, and they talked about the balance of power and how students really have no power when in terms of the grades that they're receiving. The grades are usually determined by an external source. Students have limited control, but students depend on the grade. And so this feeling of powerlessness is what is really inhibiting them from trying to do more than what is expected, or to take risks and perhaps fail as part of that risk. And so when I was working on a purely no grades kind of perspective, it felt a little bit fuzzy sometimes and not really transparent. But one of the things that I've done all along, whether or not I've used grades or proficiency scales or whatever it is that I'm using to give feedback to students, is I always have to give them a grade on the report card. And I'm gonna swing through the next couple of slides. And these are the 6 percentages that my calculus class decided yesterday that would be fair game for the report cards. And so instead of using a 100-point scale, I've narrowed it down to these 6 grades. This is unique for my calculus class. These 6 grades may have been different than like in my pre-calculus class first semester, and are certainly going to be different than the grades that are available to my grade 9s. But what I'm hoping to do is give the students some semblance of control over the grades that they're receiving, and allowing them to say, hey, these 6 make sense. This is where we feel that we kind of range from, and we would be happy with any, no, they're not all of them are happy with any of these 6 grades, but we felt that these 6 grades were kind of reflective of what was happening in the classroom. And so my goal next week is to sit down with my students, and we will look at the feedback that I've given them, and we will determine a grade together, having conversations about where the students think they are and where I think they're at.
Which really helps with the control piece that Ms. Robinson was just mentioning in terms of like having no power. There's also something in the chat. I don't know. I don't know how to work your mouse, but.
Yeah, me neither. I think I know that I can't work the mouse when I'm.
Oh, but hold on, wait, it just highlighted. There you go. Kind of.
No, we can't see the chat.
No,
Okay.
if it's, no, just leave it.
Yeah.
Moving on. Or.
Wait, I think we're going to move into like some of the tension area, because one of the things like I really wanted to talk about with Zoe here is just some of the tensions that my students are feeling. And the tension is that the feedback that I'm giving them is trying to focus on the learning. What have they learned? What are they still working on? What could they do in order to further their learning? But then we've got this 100-point scale where I have to assign them a grade in about 2 weeks on their report card, and we're feeling some tension about this. And so I think I'll talk and then I'll let you get come in. So I'm currently using an outcomes-based assessment approach. I think for my calculus class, I think I have 10 learning standards. And every time I give an assignment or a quiz, on the quiz or assignment, I've got the learning standard highlighted at the top of the question, and then I give them feedback based on that learning standard. And then I'm collecting all this information in a Google Sheet, thanks to Phil Stringer and then to Richard DeMerchant in previous sessions of these. It's really helped with my transparency issues from my no grading approach. And so I have a spreadsheet that collects all of the feedback as well as the proficiency scales that students are being assigned. And then at the end, the students get a link to a spreadsheet and they can see all the feedback that I've collected, as well as the different proficiency levels that I've assigned them on the assignments and quizzes, and perhaps even some classroom discussions and observations. But there's a tension here, because the students are still looking at these proficiency levels and saying, okay, an exceeding is 100% and a proficient is 90% and developing is 75% or whatever numbers they're associating with those levels. And they're still looking at like averaging out all of the different levels that I've given them. And so there's been some tension in that. We did there was an assignment a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them a question about finding points where a function has a tangent line with a particular value. And I saw that as that falling under a learning standard, but there wasn't anything. It was really just at the beginning stages of looking at analyzing functions with derivatives. And there was nothing even proficient about that task. It was really an introductory task. But I decided to give them proficient on that, but not extending, because there was no extending. But then students who want high grades are like, oh, I got a proficient. Oh, if I've got a proficient here and here, that means I'm never going to get to this high level that I hope to be attaining. Mm-hmm. And so I've still got these students who are associating these proficiency levels with a number grade, and they are thinking about a system of averaging rather than saying, okay, let's look at where you're at with this particular learning standard when it's time to give you a grade. Have you made progress? And now I'll let you jump in here.
And I think that that's where it becomes difficult for me as well, because I know that if we assign, let's say we have developing, proficient, and extending, and then we associate 99% with extending, proficient, extending would be 95, proficient 90, and so on. So when you look at we get a learning standard and we get our response to our assignment, and it says proficient, you go, okay, so that's 90%. And then that kind of goes in your mental file folder of all of your grades that you've gotten for this class. So you can it gives you a little bit of an idea of what you should be expecting on your mark. And it's still, that goes back to this, like, you get one try, and if, depending on how you do, then if you do well, then great, keep going, and you have a shot at getting 100% or getting a really high A or whatever you want to call it. But if you don't, then, well, sucks to be you. Like, that's the same feeling. Like, if I'm going to be totally honest, that's how I feel. And so just in terms of like my personal experience, because I think that's why I'm here, is because I've been very vocal about my experience in the classroom, because I started in the beginning of September, never having seen any of this. This is like full on, just like all of my teachers, I would see them go check X. The number goes into your computer. The computer calculates it all up, spits out an average. Boom. The computer spits out the number, and that's the number that goes on your report card. So in September, I walked into pre-calculus 12, and everything kind of got flipped around. I was personally really surprised and really confused, because, as I said earlier, I was used to a system that I knew how to work. I knew how to do it so that it would go well. But then all of a sudden it was different, and I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know how to do well in it. And all of a sudden it was not about how well I could do something. It was about how I could do it and then grow from it and then potentially go somewhere else with it. So my biggest point on all of this, I think I've more realized as I've been comparing it in preparation for this presentation, is that for me, Ms. Robinson's class is the only one that I am in currently, or that I've been in a long time, where I'm not afraid to fail. Because failing means a bad mark. Nobody wants a bad mark. Or if you're me, you don't want a bad mark. So the other side of failing is trying. So because I didn't want to fail, I was afraid to try. So if you try, you might fail. And if you fail, you get an F. And if you get an F, it goes in your grade book, and then that will average out to a lower mark and you get a bad grade. So basically, don't try. Just do what you need to do, back to compliance, back to being like just completing what you needed to do. So, and again, risk taking, too afraid to do that, because what if it goes badly, then bad mark, then it just goes back to the same thing of just like hiding in your turtle shell of like, I just don't want a bad mark. Like, what do I have to do? So last semester was definitely more of an adjustment. And I think that now I'm more aware of it. Still was the case last semester, where I'm not afraid to try because I'm not afraid to fail. And I think that that's really, really huge, because it's it translates into just, it's a skill that we learn. And the fear of failure is something that I know that me and myself and many of my peers carry with us in all aspects of life, whether it's in athletics or other scholastic things, extracurriculars, anything you can think of, because we don't want to fail. But so being in grade 12 and sort of being at the end of like grade school, it's a little bit more, it's hard to unlearn. And that's why it was so difficult for me, is because it's hard to go into it knowing what to do, and then all of a sudden having to untrain yourself from that. Like, it's almost like, I was going to say, it's like, it's like your fear reaction. It's like, I don't want a bad mark. Like, it's your amygdala going, whatever. But as I mentioned earlier with the test, it's something, if I know, do we want to talk about choice here, or what do you think?
Like the question choices?
Yeah.
Sure. So one of the things that I've been working on is providing questions, particularly on a test, where students can choose which level they want to work at, so that if they are feeling confident with the proficient, but not quite with the extending, they can make those choices. And I thought that the choice, at some point, the choice seemed to be really well received by students. But I learned that there's also some tension with giving these choices to the students to make. And so, do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay.
So the first time that you spoke to me about this, and I talked to you, this was probably in the beginning of the semester, why last semester I found choice challenging, because it's like, it sort of gives you control over, this is where I contradict myself, and then I feel like I'm unhelpful, where it gives you control over your mark, but it's scary, because if you do, let's say I go for I'm given proficient, extending, developing, and emerging questions, and myself, I'm sure we've only been together for a short period of time, but I think we all know which one I'm going for. So I would pick the extending question. But what if I do it wrong? What if I don't do it all? I don't get it right at all. I tried, I did everything I could, but I completely missed the mark. Does that mean that because I'm so far off on the extending question that I wouldn't even receive proficient? Or is it still worth something because I tried the harder one? Or should I go back and do the proficient one as well, so that I can prove that I at least understand what's going on in some way? Or if you pick the proficient and you get the answer wrong, all of a sudden you can't get extending, can't get proficient, you're just in some sort of developing stage. So back to what I was saying is that in the beginning, in the first semester, it was really hard for me to choose what I wanted. And then, so now in second semester, being a little bit more accustomed to the whole thing, I am aware, like if I see that I have choice on a test or an assignment, I will pick the harder question, even if I'm not sure that I can do it. Because I was thinking, and we were having a conversation with many of my other peers who are also in chemistry with me, if we had the same sort of choice in chemistry, where it just matters if you get the right answer, we would all pick the easiest question, because if you get the right answer, good mark, good average, the whole thing. But that's not what matters in your class. It's not the point. So I think that that's also a huge advantage in terms of preventing the fear of failure and in being more conducive to learning and trying, that I think is my biggest takeaway from all of this.
Yay. Okay, I think we've talked longer than we were supposed to talk. And so we're going to kind of wrap it up here because I do see that there are some questions in the chat. And maybe I'm going to stop sharing, hopefully. Can I figure out how to? Peter, can you force me to stop sharing?
Here, go the red thing.
I'm trying
Oh, but
to.
you have no mouse.
My
if you
mouse
escape?
has disappeared. So
Yeah. I
There you
can
go.
force you to
Oh,
stop sharing.
thank you.
You're
That was
welcome.
that was the problem with Keynote and my computer and all of that, was that I lose mouse control when I'm sharing.
Yeah,
And
it
so we're
doesn't-
going to wrap this up here and then kind of open it up to questions.
Oh, no, wait, there's
So-
3 in the.
So I think, first of all, thank you to both of you. I love hearing the journey. And hearing the journey from two sides of the same coin is so unique for us here, right? Because we talk about this from the perspective of teachers and how we perceive it's being received by students. And I think that last point that was made there around our perceptions that choice is good, and then getting a little bit of grounding on how students may interpret that choice, and that the burden of responsibility is greater when they have choice, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much to Susan, and especially to Zoe. And I don't want you to go away. I want people to ask questions. Who's got questions for our presenters here? Either one or both. Oh,
I'll ask a question.
all right.
So Zoe, thank you for your eloquence and passion actually in sharing all this. It was very moving actually, as to hear, and feels good for the kinds of practices that we think we're doing in the best interest of our students, and to hear that it actually makes a difference. I think I know the answer to this, but you've shared a lot of what you feel. Do your classmates share the same ideas as you do, or what conversations happen between you and your classmates about it?
Okay, so I wish I had so much longer because I could have so much more to say. Sorry, that's our bell going. I'm good though.
And you can share anything and it won't leave this room. I won't tell
Thank you.
anyone.
No, I just remember it was the first thing that everybody asked me, and then I told them they were doing this. They were like, "Are you gonna be honest, or are you gonna like say that everything's like perfect?" I was like, "No, but like it's not." Anyway. So I opened up the conversation. You were not in the room, to everybody, and I told them what was going on, and I asked them their perspective. And I had several students say that it was better than anything else they'd ever experienced in any other classes. I actually haven't told you any of this yet, so this is off the cuff. But it was better than anything else because it led them feel like they had more control and more of a responsibility of their own learning, rather than being confined to somebody else's perception of them. I did talk to other students who said that grades were really important because they really appreciate having a 0 to 100 point scale and knowing exactly where they fall on it, and knowing that that's where they are, where they need to be, where they could go to. And that the university conversation came up a lot about how marks will always be a thing, and marks will, well, in our idea, and university uses marks and percentages. So getting rid of them now wouldn't be as beneficial in their opinion to university going on to future post-secondary plans. So I did kind of get both sides of the coin. And I was also talking to a student who was in pre-calculus 12 with me, not calculus 12 this year. And she was telling me that in the beginning, she was really confused and was like, all of a sudden we're back to like in middle school, we get exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, approaching expectations. And like, we're like, oh my gosh, are we back in middle school? Like, what the heck is happening? But towards the end, she was like, okay, I get it. And this is better. And this is helpful. So I get a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I find that when I have an opportunity to teach grade 11 and then the next year teach grade 12, the students who have been with me for longer certainly have a better understanding of how it all works. And our report cards are due, like, I guess I'm going to be spending the next week and a half writing report cards. And so the students haven't received a report card yet. And I find a lot of times the students, especially the students who are high achievers, like right now, my grade 9s, they're blissed out and they're just doing what we're doing. And they don't really care about their grades. Whereas my grade 12 students are stressed out, heading into university acceptances and all of that. And once we decide on a grade, it's like they breathe a sigh of relief. And I sometimes wonder what it would be like if we had that conversation on day 2 and said, hey, what grade do you want? All right, I'm willing to give you this grade as long as you can provide evidence that you deserve this grade, and then take all of that stress away. Like I can kind of imagine some of the students in the calculus class who are stressed out about grades, and they're probably the students who need to be the least stressed because they're going to do really well. And there's not really any question about that, but they need that sort of external motivation to kind of breathe that sigh of relief. And sometimes the report cards do that.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks for the question, for the answers there. Anybody else have a question?
I'm curious about those blissed out grade 9s because I teach grade 7 and most of them are still very like I have whatever is given I've got to do this. So, they're pretty motivated to get stuff done, and obviously grade 11 and 12 they've got a lot at stake. So what about those students who are kind of in a place where they don't have to worry for a bit?
So my grade 9 class this semester is quite different than my grade 9 class last semester. And so we are a very slow moving bunch of people, and they're quite happy to do very little work, and nobody's really that worried about anything. And so they're hanging in there, but none of them seem to be students who are like who want to do who are determined to get an A. I mean, lots of them want to do well, but they're not. At this moment they're like whatever. Like, yes, we want to do well. They want to know if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, if they're figuring things out. But they like in terms of, am I going to get an A? Am I going to get a 98% on the report card? They're not. That's not their focus in my grade 9 class.
Do you think that going in terms of those expectations and giving them different styles of learning outcomes is easier on them?
Well, in a way, it's almost harder because they are like, I feel like I'm more transparent with my calculus class than my grade 9 class because you guys demand more.
Yep, sounds about right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jacob.
I'm kind of curious, this question for Zoe. So you've noticed a lot of changes. There's a number of things that your teacher has done differently. If you look at sort of your experience being in math classes over the years, and even this one, can you tease out the one thing, if there's only one thing that she did different, what was the thing that you think would make the biggest difference for you as a student in terms of a teacher starting out?
Okay, you gotta give me a second. This is a good question. It sounds like a really important answer, but whatever I'm gonna say is gonna go far. Okay. I think, as I've said, the biggest thing again is removing the fear of failing. And as far, I know I've had other math classes where they say like, oh, well, like one bad mark doesn't do anything, or like B's and C's still get degrees, or like all of those other things. We don't care about that. Really don't. If I'm being honest, like myself and my friends, like okay, we know that like if we have a B or a C, we'll get a degree, but like that's not the point. So in terms of, I think removing the averaging system where you know that if you have a bad mark, it won't bring down your average is, I think, the biggest shift for me. Because if you're going for something high in terms of a mark, you can't afford something low. You can't afford to bring down your average. As soon as you have a bad mark, you immediately assume that your entire, even if it's in the first week of school, you immediately assume that your entire future in that classroom is just go for a B, because there's no point, because their average is already tanked so far. So I think that adjustment has been huge. And I just got a chemistry test back today, and it was fine, but I was like, yep, my average is going to be, it's not the same as it was.
So, and just to paraphrase, because I remember very strikingly hearing on a bus a couple of students talking about protecting their A. That was their focus going into the year, and they're really anxious about being able to protect it. So what I'm hearing you saying is, if you're in a classroom where the teacher's mindset is, you can have another chance to show me that you've learned this or you've understood this, you're going to get opportunities for a do-over, or I'm going to look for additional evidence, or you can come back to me at a later date and say, I know this now, can you give me credit for having learned this? So it's not a one shot to show the learning. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly. And I mean, yes, I have had one teacher who at the end of the year would remove our lowest mark, like our lowest. So it would bring up our average, however much that was. He said everybody was allowed one bad day, which was helpful. He didn't let us do test corrections. Sorry, do you want me to stop talking? I got this. Oh no, keep going. Okay.
That was exasperation that I was exhibiting. Sorry.
Yeah, the fact you only get
You
one
keep
bad
talking.
day, right? You can only be sick once, or yeah.
I don't know, but over the last 2 years, I think we might adjust that everyone has one bad day to, you know what, there may be many bad days.
But we just came off of 2 bad years. So
What if you're going through something? What if somebody's having a really hard time? Like you should be, anyway, I could just go on about that whole thing, but
Yeah.
And I've had like, oh, you can do test corrections, and let's say you get 0 out of 5, do 0 out of 4 on this question, and then you do test corrections and you get it completely right, then you get 2 marks because you get 50% of what you would have gotten, or all of those things. But it's still all calculated. It's still all, everything is down to the numbers. And that's why we look at the numbers. That's why everything goes back to the numbers, is because that's what means everything. So it's not just give room to show learning, or like simply discard various low marks. Like you were telling me of one situation where like students had a really rough time, and then on their final exam they did really well. So then that gave that.
Yeah, that was one of the things I used to do when I was still averaging grades and putting numbers into a grade book, was if a student did better on their final exam than they did on their test averages, I just replaced the test average portion with the exam mark. And so I had one student who constantly kind of failed tests in pre-cal 11, and then worked her butt off and figured things out by the end. And on her final exam, she got 84. And so she went from having a 60 in the class with my averaging system. And I was just like, I'm just going to give her 84, because you know what? She's shown that she's made huge progress here from when she first wrote these tests. Okay, I think Jess has her hand up.
yeah. Go for it, Jess.
Hi. Amazing presentation skills, by the way. I'm quite blown away by how professional you are. I'm wondering, so I've heard a lot of talk about how this helps with your, as a high achieving student, the anxiety around grading and am I going to get into the program I want in university? And I can relate because I was a high achieving student. And so a lot of what you talked about, I can relate to from when I was going through school. what I'm wondering is, and this might be hard because it's asking you to sort of extrapolate, but do you think that you learned more math as a result of the assessment process?
Oh, okay. Another good question that I have to think about. I think so. And I think that I will realize it more in future classes. Like I wouldn't have been able to reflect on that of my pre-calculus 12 semester, but looking back after time, I know that I learned more in that pre-calculus 12 semester than I did in any other ones. So if I'm being totally honest, currently in calculus 12, I'm in the middle of it. I only kind of can see what's right in front of me, and I'm just trying to get through that. But and I was the same last semester, but looking back on it now that I'm out of it, I think yes, I have.
And does your because Sue, you have experience beyond that sort of student experience. Do you find in your tracking, like do you find the learning is greater for your students in this context?
I mean, I'd like to think so. Like, in terms of my Math 9 classes, really my goal is that the students come out liking math instead of feeling that they were defeated by math. And so I never go back and figure out whether that has worked out, like say 2 months after the course is finished. But, one of the things that I experienced regularly when I was focused on here's my unit test, averaging things out, here's an exam at the end, and doing all those traditional practices, both within my teaching and my assessment practice, was how discouraged I would be when I had students who did well throughout the semester get like 20% on their final exam and think, wow, like, you know what, those students really just, what happened there? Like, why, how could they have learned nothing? They got all these good grades throughout their time until the very end. And so that kind of disappointment isn't happening so much in terms of feeling like, the students are still working at things by the time they finish the course. I don't know if that answers your question, Jess.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just thinking, wow, that sure would have helped me in my AP math class, because I was doing great right up until I hit calculus, and then I just didn't get it, and there wasn't enough time because it was kind of crammed in at the end, and so I didn't take any more math after that. And sometimes I wonder if I'd had a little more time, if it had been less about just memorizing it and spitting it back out, whether I would have done something different, like been more confident.
Thanks for that, Jess. All right, listen. Oh, Zoe, you go right ahead.
Hold on, now I have 2 things to say. One thing, just sort of going on to it, we learn more from failing than we do from succeeding. And I think that that's like, just if I could say anything to that, then I think that that's being able to fail, being able to learn from that. That's what makes me learn more.
Mm.
That's my little piece. And I think that somebody in the chat, I really, it doesn't say everybody's full name, so I can't like address it completely, but
which one are you addressing?
this one, the purple one.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Okay, wait, and then hold on, there's another question.
That was Val, who was the purple one.
Okay.
Thank you, Val.
Val from Salmon Arm.
Oh, Chris's question was about the grade inflation. Or
So
lower.
listen, I think what we're going to do right now actually is we're going to suspend questions for a while. I want to give teachers a chance to talk to each other, right? So I'm going to create a space where everyone can just have some collaboration time. We're going to do random groups this time, and we're going to put people out into space where you can talk with each other. Talk about anything you want, but we'll try to bring you back with enough time if Susan will be here. Hopefully Zoe is still here, but I know she has another very important meeting to go to. And we will we'll maybe entertain more questions then. But in the meantime, let's unpack some of this, right? And this is one of the things that I kept bumping up across in my research as well, that what students think and experience is very different from what teachers think and experience. And that's an important consideration, even when we're doing really good work, is to think about what is the messaging the students are hearing and so on and so forth. And how are they experiencing this? So I'm going to create the groups. I'll pause the recording. Thanks for coming back, everyone. For those of you who have stuck around, that's great. I hope you had good conversation. I got the privilege of hanging out with Susan and Zoe and had a really great conversation. I'm going to ask a question to which I already know the answer, but I want everyone else to hear this answer. And the question was, Zoe, to what degree was other teachers' assessment practices disruptive to what it was that Susan was trying to do with you?
So when I walked in to Ms. Robinson's classroom, she said the same thing I've heard before. In different classrooms around the school, there's signs, or they tell us in the beginning, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how you learn. That's the bit where progress comes from. That's where you grow. But then their grading system is still the same. Still comes back to averages, still comes back to the minute idiosyncrasies of your completion marks and all of those other things. So when I walked in and I heard the same thing, initially, I thought it was the same as everybody else. I thought that she was still going to go, it's okay, you can fail, don't be afraid. You got to jump and hope you fly, whatever. But then I was like, it's going to be the same thing.
I don't think I said that, but.
That sounds like a very Salt Spring thing to say.
She sounded a lot more professional than that one. But it took me the first time that I didn't do something correctly, the first time that maybe it wasn't below 50%, but in my book, to my standard, failed. And I had to see that that was not going to be reflected as my understanding of the entire course.
Thank you. And and we had this really nice conversation about how Susan was using the same words as other teachers, but she was using different actions. And I was adding to that students read actions much more than they read words. And how can we shape our actions early on so that the students actually understand what we mean through our actions? Because the words we're using, they've heard before, but they've meant different things. All right, let's open it up. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Susan, can you expand on those actions that Peter's talking about, please?
Well, I think we're just talking about how so Zoe was saying she didn't really trust that if she didn't do well on an assessment, that she would be given more opportunities to show that she's learned from that, or that she wasn't going to be, I guess, that if she did poorly on, well, so for example, the last quiz that Zoe's class wrote, Zoe didn't even answer one of the questions. And so in other classes, she would have got 0 for that question. And she might have got, if there were 4 questions and they were each out of 5, she could have got a maximum of 15 out of 20. But what happened was I just didn't see any evidence of the learning standard that was that she was extending at this particular learning standard. And she has a chance to come back and I'll figure out a time next week where she could do another question to demonstrate that she can put together multiple derivative rules when finding the derivative of an equation that requires more than one derivative rule. And so it took a while for her to trust that even though she might do below what she was expecting, that she still had room to make improvement on that, and that first attempt wasn't going to then affect her grade in the end. That the 15 out of 20 she might have received on last week's quiz might have contributed something different to an averaging system than well, I just don't have enough evidence on that yet. Let's check back in about this next week.
It's not a one shot. You miss it, you fail. It's like you keep going.
And one of the things that we talked about was, if that's what it takes an experience to develop the trust. How do we ensure that all our students get the experience early on? Because someone like Zoe could fly at a high level of stress for 3 months before she gets to experience that and develop the trust. And someone else gets to experience that in the first week and then develop the trust. So how, as teachers, if students read actions more so than they read words, what kind of experiences can we give them early on so that they have an opportunity to develop that trust?
I think that was my next question, is like, how can we, because that one student, you would say, okay, like, you know what, you can redo this. You can show me in the morning, you can show me after lunch during quiet time, you can show me at lunch if you want a private piece. But does anybody have a system out there that is working where it's more visual or action orientated towards the whole group or vocal?
Well, we sort of talked about doing an assignment really early, like first, second day, getting them to do something and that you're going to collect and give them feedback, but to give them an assignment that's going to be really quite challenging to just sit down and get it all right. So that, like, and I don't know, I have an idea for a pre-Cal 12 one that I could do, but I'd have to think harder and longer for other courses, but just to do something really quick and give them some feedback right away based on these, like, here's what I'm looking for. No, this is, you know what, you need to go back and try this again, or have you thought about this, and just have them experience that right away rather than waiting for 2 weeks to give them an assignment.
Something hopefully nobody can do perfectly.
Right. Yeah.
But not, so Raya, for example, for your students, it could be something where you ask them to show you a relatively simple calculation. And then they do it, and then they show you, and then you say, okay, well, that's emerging because you've just done the calculation. You haven't actually shown me. Oh, you want me to, okay, so how am I going to, okay, so I'll go back, and then they draw a picture and they come back and say, okay, this is developing. Awesome. Now show me, what else can you show me? And so that they have this constant sort of, and then they start to go, oh, now I understand what you mean. And then they watch you say, okay, you got to proficient. Let's go over to my record. I'm going to record proficient in front of you.
Cool. Thank you for the idea. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Phil, I was thinking like doing something like a kind of question where a student would give a solution based on one representation and say, oh yeah, this is great, but what about this? What about this? I want to see a picture. What does the picture look like? What is the, like, what else can you do?
Yeah, Joe Bowler's diamond paper is really cool for that, where you put a question in the middle and try to have them do 4 representations. It's pretty neat and tells you a lot about what they actually know.
Right.
Yeah, Carmen, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Go for it.
Hi. Another idea would be to start at the beginning with co-constructing a rubric with the students with easy type of questions, like Peter said. Start something simple. What would be an emerging? Let's put this criteria, this descriptor. What will be a developing, and so on. So the kids are used to the way of working with rubrics and also to the language, because what's the point? Like in my school, we have been MYP since forever. And when the students will come in grade 11, I had difficult time to give them marks, to give them numbers, because they wouldn't understand what those are. So actually, I'm very happy that now we move towards rubrics and assessing with the rubrics, because the kids are already familiar from grade 8 and 9 and 10. So when they reach senior grades, for me, it's easy to say, okay, here you go. You work on this problem. Where do you think you are going to be? Let's co-construct the rubric and we'll take it from here. The only way that's different than MYP that I has been used to work is the language. the language was a bit different in junior grades of high school, whereas now in seniors, I move with a different type of rubric, different language. But as a school and as a math teachers at my school, we try now to put all the criteria and all the descriptors to be the same way from grade 8 to grade 12. So, yeah.
And Carmen, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do the teachers at your school also all carry this sort of philosophy that a student having done something can always be improved upon?
Yes. We always consider, like, it's very much our professional judgment. But in order to get to the professional judgment, we have to make the students trust us.
Yeah.
And it comes to the communication, trust, and that we are on the same side as they are. And soon enough, when at the end I will have that piece of conversation as I was talking to Rose, right? When I talk one-on-one with the students, then I would say, I think you're here. What do you think? Where can you show me some improvement? And then we have those type of pieces of interview when I communicate one-on-one before the mark goes on the report card.
So,
And Carmen, are you at Rock Ridge in West Van?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Zoe.
just Carmen, if you don't mind me asking, was how you built the trust through the personal one-on-one interviews, or like, how did that sort of process start in terms of getting your entire school on board?
Well, we start with little pieces. We have formative pieces of assessment with little a little task. It could be called the warm-up questions in the class. I'm talking about, let's say, a grade 9 class, right? When the kids are not afraid to take risks, we have a whole philosophy. We use a lot of the language, not afraid of taking risk, not afraid to step and whatever. Like it's a whole thing that builds from grade 8, grade 9, grade 10. And when they reach grade 11, for me, it was difficult because I had to put marks. They were already used to have rubrics and to be able to improve their works. Let's say they didn't do very well in something, by the end of the school year, they show evidence that they can solve a simple equation or like something like that. So professional judgment comes very much into the play.
All right, listen.
Yeah, I did here. Can I just,
Oh, yeah.
if I just
This
respond
is
to Chris?
Chris's.
So the question, in case anybody didn't read it, is regarding the assignment or some sort of experience in order to build trust in the system rather than just what teachers or Ms. Robinson is saying. And if it was possible, if past students from Ms. Robinson's class told their story as mine in the same way, or is it something you have to experience yourself? So in response to that, I think the experience, I think, is more valuable than anything else, because I think as Peter was talking about a little bit in terms of actions speak louder than words, I think it's easy sometimes, especially some students who have it a harder time. It's easier for them to sort of see teachers as more of or to villainize them a little bit in that aspect. So I think if you have more students and more allies that are giving you the same perspective, I think they have to be sort of passionate about it. Because if you just had anybody come and regurgitate the same script that was like, no, this is different, this is going to be helpful, this, you're allowed to fail, and all of those same things, then I think that that's a little bit counterintuitive. But I think if you had somebody give you a more in-depth conversation and potentially with more of a perspective you could relate to, then I think that could be really beneficial. But in terms of the experience itself, I think that speaks louder than any words.
But do you guys so my calculus class right now, there's some students who I had first semester, but lots of students that I haven't taught before. And so do you think like you guys have been kind of reassuring some of those students along the way? Or have you had conversations with the students who were brand new into the class this semester?
For sure. And I mean, good point, because there's one student who's a good friend of mine, and she, I've been with her for a long time, and she had never taken your class before except for until this class. And myself and my other friends assured her that yes, this would be like, this was like better than like it initially looks like, and it was more conducive to learning than we'd originally thought, or all of those different things. So she was more open-minded, still skeptical. So helped a little bit, didn't do the same as being in it herself now.
Yeah.
Oh, I love the way that finished. That was, and I don't want to say we're done. I want to say that the official time to be done is now upon us. And I recognize that people have lives, including Zoe. So I want to say that officially this is done. You can leave with dignity. But, and I'm going to stop the recording. But